Welcome to Enots Engineering. I'm Alan. In today's video we're looking at 5 different ways to measure a bore using different instruments. So let's go into the workshop, see how we do it. Well, the first item I have a set of small bore gauges. These go from 3mm to 13mm. And like all of these type of gauges, they're only comparison. In other words, it doesn't give you a reading. You have to use a micrometer or some other method to get the size. So how do these work? So these work simply by, it has a rod that goes through the middle with a taper on the end there. As you tighten the end of the rod, it pulls it through, and that taper then spreads these two parts, so this ball diameter here gets bigger until you get the size that you need. Now, to use these, you need the part that you need to measure, which is this little ring. What you do is put the gauge inside, turn the end, and this bit at the bottom will expand. Until it grips the bore. Once it's gripping the bore, you just get a feel on the bore for the size that you have. Transfer the size then to your micrometer or caliper. .11. Let's just check that now using the caliper. And that's how they work. It's mainly about feel on the bore. Well, that's a set of bore gauges. Now the next measuring device is this. It's an internal micrometer, and with it you get a setting ring. This ring is 25mm. So the smallest you can go on this mic is 25mm. So you just use a setting ring just to check that it's set okay. You see there, it's on the 0. And then you can measure like an ordinary micrometer, anything bigger. But for small work, you need the expanding bore gauges. So that's the micrometer. Next I have a set of telescopic gauges. These go into the bore. This expands. They are spring loaded. When the bore gauge is set to the diameter, you just lock it with this on the end, and that holds the diameter. And then you use a micrometer over the bore gauge to see what the size is. This set will go from 1/2 inch up to 6 inches. This one here, which is about 150mm, nearly 6 inches. Again, these rely on feel, so they won't be as accurate as a micrometer, which gives a direct reading. Once you have the size, you then just transfer it either with a micrometer, or you can use a caliper to get the size. And that says 43.5. So these are telescopic gauges. This one came in a set. The next way of measuring a bore is a comparator, which is this. It's a dial indicator on one end. There's a rod inside here which moves down to this end, and as that squeezes in and out there, it pushes the rod up and down and gives you a reading on the indicator. So what we'll do is turn the bore and then use the bore gauge to check the size. Well, now we have a small bore to measure, and we can use some of the gauges to check the size. So now just tighten the end of this up and it expands in the bore. You need to try and get a good feel on the bore. It's too tight. That's about it. And you transfer that to your caliper or micrometer. $13.40. Now if I try it with another telescopic gauge, this time these are just two movable rods on the end. They both have a dome on them, exactly the same. You put this in the bore. On this end is a lock, so you can tighten that down and it will lock up. So what I'm trying to do is get a nice feel in the bore. Tighten it up. $13.40. Just touching on there. $13.40 on the telescopic bore gauges. If I take this out and we look at something bigger, say this bore, I'm just using it in the lathe just so it holds it for me. Just have a quick look with the digital caliper. This is saying I'm getting 33. 33.06. Now if I check that bore with this micrometer, it has two legs that will open up. Let's put that in. This says 33.13. And that's about 0.07 millimeters difference, or nearly 3 thou. This one is another bore gauge. This is the box it was in. I've just set this up. I paid £5 for this. I think the dial indicator is probably worth that. So we'll go over to the lathe with this one, see how it works. Okay, this is the final bore comparator. This is about 3 inches. That fits into the bore on this end. So if I move the camera over to the other end, so I'll put this in the bore and I'll set it to 0, so you can see there as you move it about, there's the 0, which is the size of the bore. Now to find out the exact size, you just need to put a micrometer over the end until it comes back to 0, and that is the size. Normally you would set these with a ring gauge to the known size, So when you put this into the bore, you can see how much is left to come off. Now these are comparators because they're comparing the size to a known size. So that's the two bore comparators. This one goes up to about 6 inches with extensions. And this one goes up to maybe 1.5 inches. Ideal for production batches when you need to check a lot of bores of the same size. And I paid £5 for each of those. And of course, the one that everybody uses, digital caliper. Oh well, that's it for today. Hope that was useful. Hope you enjoyed it. And we'll see you next time on Enots Engineering.